delighted to be joined today by Deb Calvert, who is in a snowy Missouri. And she's just educating me to my ignorance of thinking that Missouri was like so far south that it would never get snow, but apparently it's not that far south and it does get snow sometimes. So how are you doing today, Deb?
I'm doing well. Thank you, John. Good to be here with you. Hey, I got to say congratulations for Pipeliner CRM being on the Magic Quadrant in 2019. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, that was very exciting, very, very exciting for the company. Okay, so Deb is one of Treeline's 65 most influential women in business, a top 50 sales influencer, a UC Berkeley instructor, and Deb founded the Sales Expert channel and offers sales training, coaching, and leadership. So she's perfect to talk about today's subject. And today's subject is the importance of strong critical thinking skills for selling. And we were just talking before we came on air with my colleague Martha in Vienna. Hey, Martha.
Hi.
And myself, John Golden from Sales Pop Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. We're just talking about how in today's culture, the pervasive culture is all shortcuts and quick and fast and like don't even think, just do, and everything is easy. The concept of critical thinking seems to run a little counter to that because it infers that you need to take a little bit of time out, you need to think a little more deeply, you maybe need to do a little bit more research, you need to strategize more. And I think that is a fantastic way of actually differentiating yourself. But before we start, Deb, let's baseline this and say, okay, critical thinking skills, maybe not everybody has the same definition of what that is. So what do you mean by it? And, what would your definition be? And by the way, if you want to join in, please do on Twitter, #sales chats, join in on Twitter. We love having the interaction. And if something interesting comes up, Martha will share with us. So Deb, baseline critical thinking skills.
You bet. I think it is really misunderstood. So I'm glad we're taking time to define it. Oftentimes people think that critical thinking is the prerequisite for that is that you're super intelligent. And that's not true at all. Critical thinking is just that you do reflect on what you've heard. You calibrate it to see if it matches other things that you've been exposed to. You use a little bit of logic to call out what makes sense and what doesn't, instead of just accepting blindly everything that comes to you. And so it's about reasoning. And at a higher level, when you get good at that, it's also about argumentation, which doesn't mean arguing, just like critical thinking doesn't mean being critical, but it means that you're able to enter into conversations and look at things from many, many angles, and that you're making a good, solid analysis before you land on a judgment.
Yeah, and like I said, it's an interesting concept because we live in this culture of speed and rushing, and everything has to happen immediately. And we're always saying, you hear all the time people saying, "Oh, I'm the busiest I've ever been," and I always counter that with, are you really? Or are you the most distracted you've ever been? Because they're not the same thing. And I think the critical thinking, as we said, it requires you to take some time out and maybe take a look at all of these other things that you're doing on a daily basis. And let's face it, you've got this little thing that's buzzing you every 5 minutes with maybe your favorite sports team's latest like update, and you're taking time out to look at that. Maybe you need to take more time out to critically think through your whole approach to selling.
Absolutely. Time management, the people who are very good time managers actually do apply good critical thinking. They are discerning. They are able to prioritize better because they don't just do, they think. They put one thing before the other instead of just multitasking in a frenzy between everything that is urgent and pops up, and they're forced to be reactive. Instead of that, they're able to be proactive because they have deliberately set out to do what is most important in that moment.
And let's face it, right? If you look at today in B2B selling, right, there's a lot more people involved in the buying process. I mean, Gartner would say it's 6 to 7 or whatever, but regardless, there's a lot of people involved in it. So you have different people who have different needs. They have different levels of involvement, different levels of influence, all of that. So it stands to reason that you are going to have to do a lot more thinking and strategizing around an opportunity to make sure that you service all the different people in the right way.
Absolutely. Critical thinkers, when you develop that skill, when you develop that mental might for it, you're a better problem solver. And in any moment in B2B selling, when you've got, let's say, 3 or 4 people around the room, they have 3 or 4 different problems, or at least they
Hmm.
have 3 or 4 perspectives on the same problem.
Right.
And so you not only have to empathize and understand, but then you have to help them problem solve. And so you've got to use this reasoning to do that.
And you have to join the dots between them, right, at the end of the day, so that they can coalesce around your solution.
Absolutely. Connecting the dots is another big one. Uh, I see this, maybe you do too, but I see it so often. I might watch a really, really good discovery call where a salesperson gathers a lot of information. Hopefully they write it down and didn't forget
Hmm.
much of it. But then they go back and they want to create a proposal, or in the moment, they're going to offer a solution. And they aren't taking what they've just heard or what they had heard from the customer and weaving it together with their solution so that those dots are connected. This is where a solution becomes compelling, is when
Hmm.
it's very, very clear how everything I need is met by everything you're offering. And we either shortcut that, but I'm concerned because I think even more often we forget to do that. We've already made up our minds what we're going to offer, and we leave the buyer out of it. But good critical thinking won't let you do that.
Yeah, and I love, that's a fantastic point there, Deb, because I do think that number one, sometimes we don't listen, we don't capture everything, and that's something. And again, I think it's some laziness has crept in there about good note taking. And let's face it, I mean, even in our own pipeline or CRM, you have a mobile app, you can do voice to text, you just say things. We couldn't make it more simple, right, to capture information. But taking good notes and really listening. And I think the other part is validating, and I think this is the part that good critical thinkers also do. Is it's not just, they don't just like you say something, Deb, and I write it down, but I also then validate it with you that I understood it correctly.
Absolutely. And sometimes hearing it back will cause you to change what you said. You said it a certain way, or you left out a piece. And if it's an important point, and I say back to you, so John, what I heard you saying, did I get all of that?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that constantly, but on an important point, if I need to capture exactly what you meant, I have to offer that opportunity to check what I heard and to give you a chance to expand on it.
Yeah, and then you have the opportunities, you said, when you go back to start to pull all of this together, you have a good solid understanding of what the needs really are, and you can start to bring it together and join the dots, as we said. But if you haven't laid that groundwork within your discovery conversations, then you're not then it's going to be a lot harder. And I do think you're right. I do think sometimes people just jump on the first thing that sounds like, oh, that sounds like our product could meet that need. I'm going to jump on that and I'm just going to go full bore.
Yeah, I call that the sales pounce. And
Yeah.
it's a very efficient seeming way to get business done, but actually you end up having to work a lot longer and a lot harder than if you would just ask another couple of questions. Is that the most important thing? Why is that the most important thing? What would it mean to you if? Right? Those kinds of
Yeah.
questions will very quickly help you to know if this is the thing that you should solve for, or if there's more, maybe even bigger, that you could be taking care of.
Yeah, or maybe this isn't even, maybe this is, I mean, here's what happens sometimes, right? Maybe this is something that before you walked into the room or before you went on the Zoom call or whatever it is with the prospect, maybe this issue actually cropped up for them a little while ago. So it's fresh in their mind. So it's the first one they tell you about, but you know what? They can live with it. It's not the most
Yes.
critical. And if you pounce on, as you say, the sales pounce, if you pounce on it, they may end up going, yeah, it's fine. I don't actually need to solve that problem. And before you know it, you've talked yourself out of a
Yeah,
sale
you're right.
rather than
Yeah.
going and developing it.
When you pounce, they bounce. That's how it works.
I love it. Good. I'm gonna steal that one. Sorry. When you pounce, they bounce.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit more about good examples. Like tell me, like what does a really good critical thinking salesperson look like, so people have some kind of model in their head that they can aim for.
Well, let's stick with this example that we've started because I think it's a
Mhm.
great one. The same thing also happens when you hear an objection. So rather than
Mhm.
a solution, let's move to that. And we don't want to pounce here either. You've heard it a million times. So when they say, oh, the price, you could pounce on that and you could give all the reasons why, or you could say, yeah, I know our price and I can catch you a little deal here. Right? You can make some sort of automated response, but that's a shortcut and it might
Mhm.
not be necessary. You know, buyers are conditioned. They know that they're supposed to ask about price. So whether it was something that they felt seriously about or not, you shouldn't just have some sort of reflexive response. To be able to think about it for a moment, to put it together with other things that they've said, like how much they really value your ability to deliver faster or some unique feature of your product. When you think about the full context of the conversation, it begs a question or two. For example, at least in your own head, well, if they like those features so much, wouldn't they be willing to pay more for them? I wonder if price really is all that important or not. So at least you're calming yourself down before you respond to the objection. And then maybe you do ask them, so wait a minute, I heard you say that this fast delivery and feature X were extremely
Mhm.
important to you. Just want to be sure, are you now telling me that price is more important? You've got to work it out, right? You've got to challenge these things if they don't make sense together. So that
Yeah,
would be an example.
yeah, and I think an important thing to underline there in what you said is the calming yourself down, because I do think that sometimes we're waiting for that gotcha question, we're waiting for that objection, and we've wound ourselves up a bit. So maybe it's price, as you say, and immediately we go into verbal diarrhea around like the price thing, as opposed to what you said is stopping yourself, calming yourself down, thinking through, and answering in a calm way, and sort of not taking it as this is going to derail me right now, or this is somewhere where it's going to get sticky. It's like, no, taking all of the other information, taking it in its composite here, I can answer this in a much more holistic fashion than just blurt out numbers and then say, but I can give you a discount too.
Yes, yes. You got to connect all the dots, not just the ones that
Mhm.
are on the table in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some of the ways, and let's even take a step back a second. What are some of the ways a critical thinking salesperson approaches their pipeline and their pipeline development? Because this is a big one that I always find, is this idea of uh, people stuff a lot of stuff into the early stages of their pipeline and don't qualify them properly because it feels good, right? It feels good to have a
Mhm.
big pipeline, even if 70% of your stage one and twos are actually not realistic and never going to close. So how do top salespeople with good critical thinking skills, how do they approach pipeline development?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, it's the formula E equals O. And that formula stands for effort equals opportunity. It's just a little formula that
Hmm.
starts your thinking down the path of critically analyzing what the opportunity looks like. So the size of the opportunity is going to tell you how much effort you should put into it, how much time that it's worth. And if the opportunity is minuscule because it's not a real prospect or it doesn't have much likelihood, or all you have is the email address of a connection that you might make, right? These opportunities, no matter how optimistic you might be, at this point, they're not true opportunities. So your effort right now until you develop the opportunity isn't something that you want to be spending a lot of time on. Now, if the opportunity is so big that it requires and demands and the opportunity is realistic, and you need some criteria to help you determine that specific to your own industry and your sales process. But if that opportunity is large enough, then yes, you allocate the time there, meaning that you won't allocate it to something else. So you have to be very critical. In this case, you have to be honest with how you're assessing what it is that you're scoping out, and use those criteria to be honest with yourself. Yes, I could do this. Well, no, that's not something that I can do.
Yeah, and I think that is, and I think the honesty piece is critical. Not just honest with yourself. I mean, that's where you got to start, obviously, but then honest with your manager, etc., and not just have and not just have an overinflated pipeline. And it's a difficult thing. I mean, I know I went through this process myself when I ran a company a number of years ago with the parent company. Is when we decided to take a much more rigorous approach to qualifying opportunities into the pipeline. We naturally reduced our pipeline, and but we reduced it to realistic, and actually our close rates got better in time. But initially, the first reaction from the parent company was like, "Well, your pipeline's much smaller than it was last year," and we said, "Yeah, but it's actually better." And that's a hard message sometimes for people to get their head around, because more always seems like more, even though it really isn't.
Yeah, quality over quantity.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some others? So what are some other areas of critical thinking that maybe salespeople don't do enough of, and could do more of, and it would benefit them?
Well, it's about how you're interacting with people too. So what we've been
Hmm.
talking about so far, it seems very much like it's logic, and logic is on one side
Yeah.
and emotions on the other,
Hmm.
but that's not the case. You see, buyers, they do have problems, and they want people who will listen to them, and they want people who can help them to see a bigger picture. And they really want people who will ask them good, thought-provoking questions. When you ask good, thought-provoking questions, and when you challenge assumptions, surprisingly, that builds trust, right? Buyers are pretty skeptical of salespeople. So salespeople who go along too quickly with what a buyer is saying, just because they want to pounce and make a fast sale, buyers are suspicious of that. They mistrust sellers who do that. So you actually can enhance relationships by connecting these dots and building trust with the insights that you bring.
Yeah, and I think that's another fantastic point, because I do think that, and any of us have know, because we're all buyers as well, that when you engage with somebody, because you can see somebody who's actually thinking about what you just said to them, as opposed to somebody who's continuing on with their spiel, whatever that is, right? And as you say, just moving along quickly, trying to say what they want to say, as opposed to stopping and thinking for a moment and going, "Huh, that's interesting what you just said. Let me think about that." And then coming, because at the end of the day, we want salespeople to bring some value, some insight to us that we otherwise wouldn't know about, right? I mean, that's the
Yes.
value that you bring, and that's what we desperately want. And I often think sometimes people fall down on that. They don't use enough of their insight or experience and bring it into the sale.
And I might just give a nuance to what you said there,
Yeah.
John. What buyers want is they want to be involved. They want to co-create
Yeah.
insights. And that means you don't just bring them something ready-made and give that
Sure.
to them, right? But the questions and what emerges as you're having that conversation, that's the real value.
Yeah, and it's like, what I mean, what is the thing that you love more when you're engaged with a salesperson and you're going through your issues, and when they say, "Actually, this very much reminds me of another customer of ours who had a similar issue," right? And then and that makes you feel, okay, well, let's hear what happened with them, and that gives you some confidence, and also kind of makes you feel, well, I'm not alone here, and this is and they've done this before, so they know what they're doing.
Yes, absolutely. And knowing when and how to use those stories
Hmm.
to be
Yeah.
able to eloquently put them in there so that the buyer sees themselves within it.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, there's a great people element to critical thinking, because at the end of the day, what's the first rule of communication is that people believe conclusions they come to by themselves over anything you can ever tell them, right? So part of your job when you're talking and when you're doing, as you say, like good questioning and whatever, is helping the other person come to those conclusions, right? And then you've come to a great place when they suddenly realize that, yes, this is something I need to take action on.
Yes. When you connect the dots, you make the path they can walk right down.
Absolutely. So if somebody was listening to this today and said, okay, what are some of the things I could start doing differently right now? What's a couple of steps I could take to take a more critical thinking and a more deliberate approach to my selling? What advice would you give them?
Well, I'd tell them to come read my long blog series about it, or to come go over to my YouTube channel. There's a playlist with 40 some odd videos about that. It's all out there. But the number one thing, even before you do any of that, the best critical thinkers do this one thing. It comes naturally to all of us. When we were about 3 years old, we were better critical thinkers then than we are now. Because you know what 3-year-olds do? They ask one question over and over and over again.
Yeah. Why?
Why? Yes. So you shut yourself down. People shut you down. They got tired of your question. They gave you answers like just because. Well, go back to being 3 and start asking that question more often, even if it's only internally. Well, why? And does this make sense? And why do I think what I think? And you'll get to this very quickly.
Yeah. And by the way, another thing you can learn from kids, actually, they're the best negotiators, because what we do as adults is we come up with our first compelling reason, and if that doesn't work, we start to bring in other ones, and we actually end up diluting our argument rather than adding to it. Whereas a kid will say, I want to go to the theme park because it's got the biggest roller coaster in the world, and say, well, we can't go, but it's got the biggest roller coaster in the world. Well, we can, but it's got the biggest roller coaster in the world. And they don't dilute their arguments, and just like they continue with the why questions. And I love that idea of why. And even when you think you've arrived at a good place, it's always, if you just go that extra why, sometimes I think that's when you're compelling your buyer to critically think.
Yes.
I think now
I'll
you
tell you
have
the
a
best
win-win.
negotiation I ever witnessed. My daughter was 4 years old, and it was a week before her birthday when she said, what I want for my birthday is a baby brother. And we said, oh, we can't do that in time for your birthday. And she was very, very upset. And she came back a little while later and she said, well, then can I have a dog?
Yeah, well, it's good. Good. It could have been a pony. Could have been worse.
Right.
So that's the first thing, is asking why and really digging deep. And then what's the next step in that process, would you say? I mean, it's one thing to ask why. It's the next thing to actually do something with the information that comes back.
Exactly. You said at the very beginning of this conversation, which was you have to slow down. That doesn't mean you're going to get less done. It doesn't mean that you're going to look lazy. It means, though, that when you are able to decide and when you make good reasoned judgments about what you do and how you do it, you're actually going to become a lot more effective. And you'll be developing the habit, asking the question, making a deliberate decision. Because you've slowed down, you end up speeding up.
Yeah, and you qualify better, right? And you qualify things out better too. And I think that is probably the least good skill that a lot of people have, is the qualifying out things. It's very easy to qualify things in because we can be overly optimistic, but qualifying things out of your pipeline is another thing entirely. And I think you're right. I think the efficiency comes because if you are going that level deeper, you're going to know pretty quickly whether this is something that you can actually, this is a good opportunity for you or not.
It is. And when you qualify someone out, you have more time for something else that's more realistic. So it's about settling into your reasons why and then proceeding so that you make the choices that'll give you what you need.
Yeah, and as you said at the beginning too, I mean, it's time management, and the top performers are good time management. And like I said, I mean, if this thing is bugging you all day long with things that actually don't contribute to you making a sale or whatever, then you should switch off all those alerts, right? Maybe ignore it. You can live, you can go 24 hours without knowing something that's not like 100% relative to your job, right? Or relevant to your job.
Yeah. Or start with an hour if you can't do 24.
Yeah. Exactly, exactly. Um, okay, Deb, before we conclude this, is there anything else you want to mention around critical thinking?
No, I do think critical thinkers are also receptive and open learners. So
Hmm.
eventually you're going to get open to feedback and you're going to get hungry for more information. And so then you'll go to places like Sales Pop and the Sales Experts channel, and you'll start taking in more and more information. But you'll have bandwidth for it. You'll have capacity because of all this great time that we're saving you and all the new tools that will be at your disposal.
Yeah, and I love that. That's a fantastic one to end on there because I do think is learning is so critical. And I think if you are to be you can't become a critical thinker in isolation. It's not just you can just develop the critical thinking skills, but you don't learn or educate yourself at the same time. I think they go hand in hand. What we do like at the end of these sessions, Deb, is to ask our guest is your power tip, right? What do you, Deb, do every day or every week to set yourself up for success?
Every day, multiple times a day. I have this plastered on my laptop and in a few other places, but my power tip is that I choose joy.
Mm,
Right? I could choose a lot of other things in any situation, but I choose joy. It's a personal choice. It helps me to work better, and it helps me to feel better, and it makes my life a lot easier than when I was making other choices.
yeah, I think that's a fantastic one, Deb. I love that. Choose joy because yes, I mean we have choices how we react, and unfortunately, and just let me pull out my soapbox for a second. Unfortunately, like we live in a world today where and somebody, it was another guest who gave me this term like recreational anger, which I think is a fantastic term, where people just love to get upset all the time. They're looking, they're angry. They're looking for reasons to be angry all the time. Choosing joy. I mean, it's a choice. Like put that aside. The world will be a better place, even if it's just in your circle around you. The world will be a better place if you were more conscious of that and choose joy and put aside those things and say, am I really making the world a better place by being angry or upset and like looking for things to get upset about? So I love that. Thank you, Deb. That's fantastic. All right, so we're coming to the end of our webinar today, our sales chat. All of Deb's information and all her links will be in her contributor bio. But before we go, Deb, tell people a little bit more about yourself and the fantastic work you do with your channel.
Oh, well, thank you. So the Sales Experts channel is something that's my side project. It's my give back, if you will, to the sales
Mhm.
community. And this year there are 76 different people who are contributing content, videos and webinars, and it's a great community. So we're also getting ready to launch our series of roadshow live events coming to a
Yeah.
variety of cities in the US. So look out for those. My company, People First Productivity Solutions, we work in sales productivity, leadership development, and team effectiveness. Three areas that seem different, but what they have in common is that it's just about helping people get connected. And that's the work I love to do. So I hope that people here will think about getting connected with me, maybe over on LinkedIn or in whatever way works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I highly recommend connecting with Deb, and I highly recommend checking out the work that she does herself and her sales acceleration channel. Listen, this has been a fantastic. Martha, how has the Twitter chat been?
Yeah, very nice. So you are almost on the same page, I would say. There were some topics for someone said that it would be great when you have to practice arguments. So what to say, what exactly to say, and also to concentrate, to be more concentrate on more challenging work.
Yeah.
And yeah, good.
Yeah, well, I think as Deb would probably agree, yeah, I think practicing is always good, and that's the role of your sales manager slash coach. They should be working with you all the time. So those sales managers or sales leaders out there who are watching, get coaching and role playing with your people, right, Deb?
Right, absolutely. And if you are working on this, I call it an advanced, a next level skill of critical thinking. It involves things like recognizing logical fallacies. Like when people say, "Do you want A or B?" When the truth is, you could have a blend of A and B. You don't have to
Yeah.
have this false dichotomy, something that
Mhm.
forces a choice that's not real. But just asking the question, why? Why do I have to choose? Will help you to get there, even if you don't have the fancy terminology behind it.
I love it. All right. Well, listen, thanks everybody for joining us. And for those who watch the recording later on, thanks, Deb. Thank you, Martha. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. See you all for another sales chat really soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.